Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about the fact that a number of people have come to me saying, hey, there are certain YouTubers who are promoting doing heavy quarter squats and who are promoting doing really heavy rack lockouts above the knee to overload the upper back and things like this. What do you think about it? So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on skill at my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. And actually this kind of goes the opposite direction of a lot of what I promote. I usually tell people the best way to build strength isn't always to use the heaviest weight possible on any exercise. It's to use the longest range of motion possible, to do things like pause work. And a lot of times that requires you to use less weight, that you train joints through full ranges of motion. You're going to get more overall strength out of it, even if you're forced to use a slightly lighter weight. One of the reasons I promote things like deficit deadlifts. The reason I promote the closed grip bench press for general strength building over the wide grip bench press. You move the weight further. Yes, it's harder, but it will develop strength through a longer range of motion. And again, partial training and joint angle specificity have their place in certain sport-specific training, but they should never be included in general strength buildup when you're just trying to get overall stronger. And that's where these two techniques fall into. And so people who are promoting them outside of that context, I really can't get behind that. I can't support that idea. Other than using them for sport-specific weakness training, they probably don't have much real value that you don't get out of doing full range of motion. Now, some people will say, well, what do you mean? You're using a heavier weight. You're using better stabilizers. No, not always. It might sound that way, but step back and look at the squat for a minute. On the squat, people are having to use belts, and they're having to maintain a very, very upright position. More so on these partial squats. And obviously you're going to have to do them in a rack. You're going to have to do them with something to limit the range of motion. If you're doing partials that aren't pin presses and you're not squatting all the way down, you are setting yourself up for injury. I would never, ever, ever recommend anyone do a partial squat or anything but a full range of motion below parallel squat without stops of some type. Because the fact of the matter is, I believe that destroys your knees. I think half squats actually damage people's knee joints. I've been convinced of this for over a decade. And again, it has to do with slowing yourself down at the bottom, changes the curve, and it puts more stress on the knees. So obviously people are talking about pin squats, for where you're squatting off of pins. Well, the thing is, when you do that, you're putting yourself in an anatomical position to actually protect your core more, so that your core, everything stays more upright when you do it that way, more so than you would be able to do on a full squat. And people are using a belt. And yeah, there are people up there whose max squat might only be 400 pounds who can do 500, 600 pounds on these quarter squat pin squats. But you're not building your core more. If you wanted to get a stronger core, get stronger squatting without a belt. Go all the way down, learn to do pause squats without a belt. That will actually develop all your core, thoracic erectors, and everything else up just as much as what you're trying to get out of these partials, but with less chance of injury, because at the end of the day, overloading 100 or 200 pounds on a partial can inflame joints. It can inflame things because you haven't built yourself up to handle that weight. Normally, it's not always beneficial. It can be a recovery issue. It can be a connective tissue issue, and particularly it can be hard on your joints. There's a trade-off for this, and the problem is that the strength doesn't always carry over to the full range of motion. Number one, you have joint angle specificities to consider. You don't gain much carryover in strength beyond about 15 degrees of joint angle from which you train it. So in other words, if you train a lift through 90 degrees of the 180 degree range of motion of a joint regularly, you're going to find that anything past about 105 degrees, that strength you gained is going to taper off really fast. So you're not going to get as much carryover as you might think. And because you're bracing everything to give yourself better leverages on your core, even though you're adding more weight, all you're doing is compressing your spine more. You're not actually training your core and your thoracic erectors and all of that more than you would if you were just doing full range of motion without a belt. And remember, that belt also changes things. But you're doing different biomechanics, different angles. Really, all it does is compress the spine more, in my opinion. I don't think for most people there's a reason to do this. There are certain people with certain squat weaknesses at the elite level who can benefit from this. Most people aren't. Same thing. Let's go over and let's start looking at the rack lockouts with the deadlifts. Everyone's like, well, you know, you're pulling above the knee out with a belt, strapped up, all of this stuff. People are thinking that they're overloading their upper back more. It's kind of like people who get this idea that if they go do a bunch of really heavy pen presses for the bench press because they've got more weight, right? They've got way more weight, that they're going to build their triceps more because a lockout is more tricep, and that's the idea here. Well, the upper back is used more at the top, so you're training the top through a heavier range of motion, right? With a much heavier weight through the range of motion where you work that. That's the same logic that's applied to doing 3-inch pin presses and board presses on the bench press. That only really is useful for who? People who bench with a shirt, with a bench shirt. Raw benchers very rarely get much out of that, even though in theory they're trying to make their triceps bigger because you're overloading the muscle at an angle to where it's anatomically stronger because it doesn't have to work as hard. All right, it's harder for your triceps, for example, to work down here than it is for them at the top. It's an easier angle. You get much better leverages, so it's much easier to move the same weight. So obviously you can move a heavier weight. That doesn't mean the muscle's moving more. So I want people to think about these above the knee heavy rack lockouts. Think about that for a moment. Are you actually working the muscles more, or are you just putting yourself into a better anatomical position for the leverages of those muscles? Because yeah, we can all do that. I messed with that many years ago. And when I say many years ago, God, I'm trying to think. Over 15 years ago, I messed a little bit with the rack lockouts back when my max deadlift was in the low 600s, maybe a 625 max. I was able to do 725 with this exact exercise for sets of 5. I was able to add 100 pounds to my max and do 5 reps with it. You know what? I don't think it helped me at all. I mean, I messed with it a little bit and I'm like, okay, well that's cool, but all I feel like I'm doing is aggravating stuff and possibly inflaming connective tissue. Because the thing is, yeah, you are compressing the spine more, but it's kind of like that whole idea when you go back to the squat. People are like, well, you know, you can overload more on these squats and train your upper back more. Well, that's why you deadlift. The deadlift is a partial squat with a heavier weight. Think about the deadlift. Your knees and your hips do not drop as deep as they do in a squat. And you use a heavier weight than you can use on the squat. If you're good at the deadlift, if you do it correctly, your deadlift should be higher than your squat. So you're already getting that upper back overload doing a normal conventional deadlift. You shouldn't need to do a specialized squat to do what a deadlift does. Well, let's hop over to trying to do this to train the upper back even more. Is it really going to do that? Sure, you're compressing your spine more. Sure, you're pulling on your traps more. You're pulling on your connective tissue more, but you're also removing your grip from the equation, so you're not getting your grip training in because you're having to strap up to do this. So you're doing a deadlift that's not training your grip. You're not training your hamstrings to the same extent. All you're doing is having the upper back work, but is it really doing more work? Are you telling me that the thoracic erectors, when you put yourself into a position to where you don't have to come over as much? Think about that. That's why you can lift more weight. It's not because the muscles are working harder, it's because they don't have to work as hard. If you can add 100 pounds on an exercise through a partial range of motion, I can promise you that it's not the muscles working harder, it's that the muscles are at a more favorable angle that you're putting yourself into where they don't have to work as hard to move the same weight. So you have to add weight to make them do the same work, and that's the problem. That is what you're doing here. You're doing the same amount of work for these muscles. And the reason I say that, when you do a deadlift, you've got to get the bar past your knee. That requires you to bend over more. That works your mid-back, mid-traps, all that stuff a lot to have to do that bend over. All right, your thoracic erectors and your core get worked tremendously because you have to get the bar past the knees. And think about the angle differences. When you're doing it above the knee, you're starting, instead of having to pull from down here, you're starting pulled further back. All right, there's less bend to your upper back, less bend to your back in general. It has a more favorable mechanical advantage. So yeah, obviously you can lift more weights because the muscles don't have to work as hard at those angles. The muscles don't have to work as hard as those angles. That's why you're able to lift more weight. But they're not getting more work. You're having to add the 100 pounds to make them do the same amount of work. You're not getting a benefit. They're not getting worked harder. All you're doing is removing the hamstrings and removing your grip, so you're not working those while you're just working the upper back. And some people would say, well, maybe the traps, because you're putting extra weight pulling down on the traps. But I'm going to be frank here, guys. If you guys really think that a weighted stretch is going to produce more muscle gains than actually working a muscle through full range of motion, that's just not reality. And the traps get worked on a variety of exercises. If you have a wide variety of exercises for your shoulder girdle and pulling in your routine, your traps are going to get worked tremendously to the maximum they can do. Meaning if you're overhead pressing, you're rowing, you're chinning, you're deadlifting, your traps are getting worked on 4 or 5 different exercises. Stuff like this isn't essential. You probably need to do more of the basics. And that's the reality of this. People want to come in and do stuff like this. Oh, because it looks cool, it looks hardcore, I'm going to lift a really heavy weight, but you're not really doing any more work. You're not working the muscles any harder, and what you are doing isn't going to carry over as much to your full range of motion strength. If anything, you're taking some muscles out. You're de-emphasizing very, very important muscles. On all these variations, things like the hamstrings, on either one of these things, for example, are getting less work. Like, well, I need more upper back. Well, do more upper back work. Do more cleans. Do more pen lay rows. Do more overhead pressing. That whole upper shoulder girdle and back area is going to get worked. Do more deadlifting. Just normal basic exercises can bring that up. If it's lagging, if that area is lagging for you, it's because you're not doing enough of the basic exercises that work it, because that area gets worked on most basic exercises. Again, this is just people promoting something that looks hardcore. It's not giving them any benefit beyond basic training. And the sad part is you see people who haven't built a really solid strength base yet, who come over and they see stuff like this and do it. When I mean a strength base, if you can't deadlift 500 pounds beltless, or you can't do a 405 ass to grass squat, you haven't really built a strength base yet. And if you're jumping over, playing around with other stuff like this that's way outside the basics, hoping to get an advantage, you need to go back and work on building your base more. Your base isn't complete. Worry about stuff like that. Worry about different methods like this to help you break through plateaus and certain points in an exercise once you've built an actual strength base and you're a fairly advanced lifter. But people who don't have a strength base goofing around with stuff like this, quite frankly, I feel like it's going to slow their progress rather than help them. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.